Hi, there are many different types of roles you can take on in your relationships with your team members to produce results. Supervisor, teacher, manager, mentor, coach, leader. Now, a lot of these terms are used in different ways by different people and different organizations. So please don't take the definitions we're going to use as the right definitions of the words. It's just the way we use them at Stillwater. We're going to talk about how these roles are different from each other, what skills you need for them, when is the best time to use which role, and how we need to change our style as we grow in our careers. When most people are hired for their first job, they take the role of an individual contributor, and the first thing they need to do is develop task expertise. And if you excel at your job, then you might be promoted from your group of peers and be given a supervisory role. Now, a supervisory's job is to tell team members what to do and check they're doing it. A sales supervisor, for example, might call the team members every day to check what their progress is on their targets and to give further instructions. And the skill you need to develop at this level is finding a way to achieve both task focus and people focus simultaneously. Most supervisors end up either being too task focused or too people focused. If you're task focused supervisor and one of your team members is struggling, you might find yourself getting frustrated with what you feel are excuses and telling them to just do it. Or you might feel that there is not enough time to explain and that with your task expertise, it's probably just going to be faster to jump in and do it yourself. And this may be required in some real emergencies, but if you're doing this too frequently, it's going to be counterproductive. It's like a parent jumping in to do the homework for their kid instead of teaching their kid how to do it. If on the other side, you're overly worried about being liked, then you might end up buying the excuses of your team members and either telling them not to worry about it or diving in to do the work yourself. So most supervisors spend their time figuring out where to place themselves on the axis and what compromises to make. But the best supervisors are the ones who realize that tasks and people actually exist on separate axes. There's some supervisors who don't care about either, but they don't survive too long in a high performance culture. The best bosses are the ones who say you can do it and you will do it. The task is important and your development is important. So we'll sit down and we'll have a conversation to figure it out. But I'm not going to have you question your capabilities. I'm going to push you so that you achieve your objectives. In fact, they don't see people as a resource through which they can achieve their own personal results. They see tasks as a mechanism through which they can build people. And so, a good supervisor quickly moves up the ladder to incorporate the teacher role in their relationships with their team. You can only do this if you've motivated your team enough so they don't need to be constantly watched. In the teacher role, you're transferring theory and knowledge. And the skill you need to display at this level is the ability to explain best practice simply and persuasively. You're not telling your team members what to do and monitoring them, but instead explaining the best way to do something so they can do it themselves. In a professional services firm, for example, instead of checking the spreadsheets of your team members, you might teach them a stepwise process through which they can audit their own work. Now, there's also a limitation to how much you can achieve when you act as a teacher. When you're explaining to your team members the right way to do something, you're not empowering them to do it in new, possibly even better ways. Or perhaps you're not giving them the space to do it in a way that makes best use of their own strengths and working style. You've got to check that the systems you've asked them to follow are actually helpful to them and practically implementable as well. Do they feel that the systems are there to help them achieve their targets or to help you monitor and control them? Because there is a huge potential downside to over-prescriptive teaching. If you explain to your team member that in order to achieve an outcome, they should do A, B, and C, and then they don't achieve the result, then they might simply say to you, I did what you told me. And what they're implying is this is not my result, this is your result. So in order for you to produce better results so you can contribute more to the organization and rise further in your career, you need to keep a culture which your team members feel a sense of ownership and accountability for the outcomes they produce. But they can only be held accountable for results if they are the ones making the decisions that influence that outcome. And that means you also start taking on the risk of them not doing it the way that you would have done it if you were making all the decisions. So if you want to grow, you've got to let go. Now you can only move to the manager role if your team members have a certain amount of process mindset and an ethical long-term view. And if the rewards and recognition are based on metrics that support this. Otherwise, they might break systems to achieve personal short-term targets. The tasks you're delegating as a manager are much more complex than when you're a supervisor. And because you're not monitoring them the entire time, the skills you need as a manager is rigorous communication. The ability to make your expectations very clear, to translate them into unambiguous commitments, to manage those agreements and hold people accountable to them. The next step up from a manager is taking on the role of a mentor. Here you let your team members almost decide their own goals and approach. But you can only do this when you feel they've reached the required level of motivation, integrity, skill level, process orientation, and results focus. They will do the best they can to achieve the result at this level, but in some complex projects or assignments, they might make some mistakes because they don't have as much experience as you do. And that's where mentoring comes in. If teaching is about sharing theory, then mentoring is about sharing experience. So your role as a mentor is to speed up their development and improve their performance by sharing some of your own learnings and offering suggestions. But by and large, you let them make their own decisions so they still have ownership of the outcome. As a teacher, you're telling them, this is what you should do. As a mentor, you're telling them, this is something that worked for me. It's one of the things you could do. And give them the freedom on how they want to proceed because the project is their baby. An even higher level of empowerment is moving up from the role of a mentor to taking on the role of a coach. When you're acting from this role, you don't even share your own suggestions or experience because that might feel intrusive or cramp their style. Of course, you only take on the role of a coach when your team members have a lot of rich experience themselves. A CEO, for example, might have much less functional knowledge than some of the directors reporting to him or her. IT, sales, manufacturing, HR, etc. The key skill at this level is asking excellent questions that provoke thinking. A CEO of a firm might ask the head of R&D what new technologies he or she feels the division needs to develop, what budget would be required, and what are the complexities and challenges they will need to overcome. As a coach, your job is to be a sounding board, to ask questions to help your team members think through their approach more rigorously and give them feedback. Of course, you need to make sure they're aligned with the other team members and overall strategy, but a coach role is the role with the highest level of empowerment. This is not to say that the coach role is better than a supervisor role. Which role you take on in a conversation depends on the situation and the team member you're dealing with. If you give complete freedom to someone with no skill or motivation or integrity, then you're going to have problems. And if you micromanage a motivated, skilled, experienced team member, you're going to constrain and demotivate them. You got to figure out which role is appropriate when. But there is a chicken and egg sort of problem here. You'll be unwilling to trust team members until they display higher levels of performance, and they will not have the space to show a high level of performance till you give them more trust. And that's where the role of a leader comes in. Leadership is showing up in a way that inspires trust and credibility in your team members so that they want to do their best and do it with integrity. If someone in your team is not stepping up when you step back, then the uncomfortable leadership question we've got to ask ourselves is, what is it about the way I am showing up that is contributing to that? Leadership is the relationship that will fuel the growth of your team members, allow you to move up this pyramid. We've got an entire course to cover the principles of leadership, so we won't cover them in this video, but what we've found in our work with leaders at different levels is that when they start in people management roles, they spend a greater percentage of their time in the roles at the bottom of the pyramid, and as they move up in their career, they spend a greater percentage of the time at the top of the pyramid. So here's the question we've been building towards for this lesson. What percentage of time are you spending in each one of these roles at the moment? How do you feel the relative proportions need to change, if at all, for you to move to the next level in terms of building people and producing results? And what actions would you need to take specifically to make that happen?